In the early spring of 1912, Caroline Bonnell was living the dream of a young woman from a wealthy, well-connected American family. Born into privilege in Cleveland, Ohio, she was part of a prominent lineage that had afforded her a life of elegance and adventure. At 30 years old, Caroline was bright, cultured, and curious about the world. Little did she know, her next great adventure would forever change the course of her life and thrust her into one of history's most harrowing stories. Caroline had embarked on a European tour with her cousin and close friends, savoring the art, culture, and sophistication of the old world. By the time April rolled around, it was time to return home to the United States. Like many wealthy travelers of the time, she chose to sail on the RMS Titanic, the most luxurious ship ever built, which was making its maiden voyage. The Titanic, with its grand staircase, first-class dining salons, and opulent suites, was a marvel of engineering and excess. Caroline, a first-class passenger, found herself among the elite of society, business magnates, politicians, and celebrities. She mingled with the likes of John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and the Countess of Rothes. As the ship glided smoothly across the Atlantic, the atmosphere was festive, and no one could have anticipated the impending catastrophe. But on the night of April 14, 1912, everything changed. Caroline was fast asleep in her luxurious stateroom when the unthinkable happened. The Titanic struck an iceberg. At first, like many others, Caroline had no idea how serious the situation was, but soon, the icy waters of the North Atlantic began to rush in, and panic gripped the ship. As the crew worked to lower lifeboats, chaos broke out on the decks. Despite the mayhem, Caroline remained calm, and being in first class gave her a crucial advantage. First-class passengers were among the first to be escorted to safety, but even then it wasn't guaranteed. Caroline was helped into Lifeboat 8, which had space for around 65 people but was lowered into the sea with only about half that number. The women and children policy ensured that many women, including Caroline, boarded lifeboats while men were left behind. As the lifeboat descended from the side of the massive Titanic, the sound of the ship's orchestra playing light music filled the cold night air, a bizarre contrast to the panic that was slowly rising. Sitting in the lifeboat under the freezing starlit sky, Caroline could only watch in horror as the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, began to break apart and sink into the icy depths. The unimaginable tragedy unfolded before her eyes. Survivors could hear the cries of those still aboard, the confusion and the growing realization that many would not survive. After hours adrift in the frigid waters, Caroline and the others in her lifeboat were finally rescued by the RMS Carpathia, the ship that had responded to Titanic's distress calls. Shivering and shaken, Caroline was one of the fortunate few to have survived. Over 1,500 others, including many of the first-class passengers she had dined and conversed with just days earlier, were not as lucky. Back in the United States, Caroline's survival became part of the broader Titanic legend. In the years following the disaster, she, like many survivors, struggled with the trauma of that night. The experience stayed with her for the rest of her life, a haunting reminder of how fleeting and fragile human life could be, even in the lap of luxury. Caroline Bonnell went on to live a full life, but the memory of the Titanic never left her. She was one of the few first-class women to survive that fateful night, a symbol of both fortune and tragedy. In the quiet moments of her later years, she must have remembered those final hours on the lifeboat, the cold ocean, and the sinking of the world's grandest ship, an event that would forever tie her name to one of the greatest maritime disasters in history.